Looking at the personal style of a few different short story writers, and they're full story writers as well, but we're first focusing on Tara June Winch. She is an Australian author. She's an Indigenous woman. And let's have a look at the key features. The first one that I notice, and I know that some of you noticed as well, is that she uses first person narrative perspective like a lot. And I think that's because it's such a happy marriage between what first person narrative perspective really produces in terms of effect on the audience is in such alignment with what her, I think, intent is as a writer and effect on the audience as well. It really means that it forces the reader to empathize, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word, forces the reader to empathize with the perspectives of people that they may not otherwise come in contact with, and also gives a voice, quite a powerful voice, to voiceless people in the world. So I think that is integral to her purposes as a writer, is that she wants to showcase diverse perspectives, and first person narrative perspective really gives her the capacity to do that in a way that moves the reader to almost uncomfortably empathize with people from very diverse backgrounds. It also means that it's a kind of a platform through which lots of the other techniques we'll talk about can exist. So for instance, the stream of consciousness style writing, the idea that the text imitates, her word choices imitate more the way that people think rather than the way that people talk, is a really kind of key focus of it. It's what adds to the realism for the reader, and gives them the capacity to kind of see themselves in the character as well. The second thing, again, it's a very realistic convention. She's a very realistic writer. The plot itself is not particularly fanciful, whimsical, or out of the ordinary. She's kind of dealing with real life issues and social issues, and so it's very grounded in relatable instances. There's a touch of the absurd in there, like it's almost like it forces you to look at your own life in a way and notice how kind of weird regular things are, as you kind of watch somebody else living out their quite typical experiences. You can notice the absurdity in the ways that people overthink about certain things and make snap judgments about other things, the hypocritical nature of human beings. It makes you smirk at yourself. That's the way I would describe it. It makes you smirk at yourself. So it's very anti-escapist. Some people read to go explore fantasy worlds so they don't have to think about the problems and difficulties and complexities of the social issues that they find themselves in this world. Tara June Winch's books do not do that, despite the fact that there are, definitely there's something absorbing about her writing. It's a pleasure to read. She has a poetic style. But at the end of the day, the issues explored in her texts are real world gritty issues. I will just point out here, because I like the wording of this, the minutiae of the events in focus demonstrate the weightiness of all that we take for granted in our everyday lives. So there's lots of references to, just an understated word from a trusted friend, or a protagonist or a narrator notices the beauty of a particular plant, something like that. There's a focus on little moments, and that creates this sort of tapestry and of like a catalogue of very mundane experiences on the one hand, but again forces the reader to almost apply that lens to their own life and realise, true, we have this in common. There is this kind of common good, common evil, common humanity between us. A very key feature is that the protagonist of her texts are almost always people who feel othered or outsiders in some way. So voice to the voiceless is a really key theme in her writing, seems to be a chief aim of her writing. She speaks quite openly about this as well in some of the articles that are put up on the LMS for you to look at. You'll see that. It is notable that language barrier is often the cause of the alienation. So it's not just that people are othered for being weird. There's racial tensions is often in feature in the text. And more than that, she has this really deep conviction about the importance of language, speaking a native language, listening to native language, viewing the world through language, like that language itself shapes your experience. Your words for things are a vehicle of understanding and knowing the world around you. So where somebody can't understand your language or disregards your language, it's almost as though they've disregarded the most foundational thing about you, and that there's like an irreconcilable gulf between you. Second last one, Judgey. She's pretty judgy of people, and her protagonist narrators are pretty judgy of people, in that they have often clipped little descriptions of people, like it's a snap judgment is made. So we have this kind of balance between moments in which an idea, a thought, something that we're looking at in the text, and a visual image that the character is gazing upon or thinking about, spirals and spins, and lots of time is spent exploring it. And then we also shift, and there's these times in her writing where the descriptions of people are very snappy, almost hypocritically so. So there are some quick, conclusive portraits that highlight the weirdness or sameness of people. So I say weirdness or sameness because as the protagonists are outsiders themselves, a lot of the time, it's often the fact that the protagonists are either hypocritically judgmental of other outsiders in their community for whatever reason, or they are quite critical of people who they believe to be in the majority. Sameness, idea that there's no diversity about these people, there's no distinctive characteristics, there's no distinctive life story, they don't have their own problems. There's kind of like them and me, and the them is quite a critical judgment. One of the reasons why I think she does this and adds this layer of complexity to her narrators, they're not perfect people. This isn't a very flattering quality that the narrator protagonist has. But we do, what is jumping to mind really is this definitely occurs, and more as the protagonist from Baby Island spirals. The more stressed that she becomes and the closer to breaking point she becomes, the more dismissive she becomes of other people, and the more kind of insular and closed she becomes. I think we as readers, when we read characters thinking like that, we don't think, oh, what an awful person. We think, oh, I do that. I do that in my mind. I often will make just a quick, blunt judgment of someone, and often it's wrong, often it's prejudiced. Lastly here, I think she gets this balance right. Her stories are often as gritty as they are pretty. So there'll be, beautiful poetic language. She has a lovely, clever writing style. It really draws you in, and just, seasoned with swear words. So there's this real sense in which it's grounded by the ugly parts of language as well. Again, that's what adds to the realism. It's what adds to the feeling that the protagonists are being true and real and emotionally vulnerable and imperfect in some ways as well. Now it's your turn. You can basically look through again at these slides and see if you can find specific examples of each of these things at play in Baby Island and also in The Last Class.